Every Saturday is Catterday on Echoplex Media, and not only are we posting fucking cats, we invite all content creators to join our open panel. Visit echoplexmedia.com/panel to learn how to join. Every third Saturday is Operation Catterday, where we cover this week and last year and play the best clips from the cast of conspiracy characters that Now Space has learned to loathe. The show starts at 8 p.m. Pacific at twitch.tv/echoplexmedia. Find our full schedule at echoplexmedia.com.
I am white, and I got everything I need. No one clutches the purses when they're in a room alone with me. And I can drive through any neighborhood I please at any hour, and the police don't do a thing. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got everything I need. I'm a guy getting paid more than a girl with a degree. I can walk down the streets after dark, no one wants to rape me. I can get a girl pregnant and just as easily flee, like my straight white male dad did to me. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. I'm a pile of broken mirrors and I'm walking under ladders and I'm feeling tons of salt, but to me that doesn't matter, cause my skin and my gender and my orientation, the best things to have if you live in this nation. Recommend it highly. Yes, I recommend it highly. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. Shit's gonna work out for me, cause I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We do the show live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. That's Pacific time. Oh, man, I suck at this. Anyway, shout out to River Black for coming in last night and giving us a live rendition of the theme song for this show. That's American Tune by the Panhandlers Union. And I'll be running that at the beginning of the show for the next couple of weeks just so everybody can check it out and don't sleep on the Local Love podcast. We had a great time interviewing River last night. Anyway, I'm Producer Dave, and you can find me many places, Port 87 and Grindr. Uh-oh. Yeah, I don't have any sound from HK. This is live, everybody, in case you didn't notice. The show is, in fact, live. I can vamp for a minute. You can find me on Port 87 at Dave. That's port87.social. You can find HK Perrin there at H Perrin.
How about now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. I had the wrong thing plugged in my patch bay.
These things
I'm
do happen.
I'm HK Perrin, and you can find me at port87.social at hperrin. Sorry, I'm missing the K on there. And you can also find me on twitch.tv at Sylphweed, which is my name in the chat. So if you're talking to someone named Sylphweed in the chat, that's me.
Fantastic. Fantastic. What'd you think of that live rendition of our theme song?
That was awesome. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. It was a really, really nice of River to do that for us, because that's like one of their that's like one of their songs they always play, and he probably didn't want to play it yet again. You know what I'm saying? But I was like, oh, my chat would probably absolutely love it if they could hear this tomorrow night. So anyway, yeah. Unfortunately, we have some content this evening, and the best part of the show's over, the live rendition of American Tune. Here we go. This is we'll skip the intro part here because the intro on these is just a clip from the show. This is Dave Rubin speaking with Michael Shermer about why smart people believe in conspiracy theories.
That rubric. Yeah, and I really liked how you did that. So as you said, there's sort of 3 sections to the book, a prologue that leads into it, but then each one sort of leads into the next one. So I want to get into some of that, but broadly speaking, one of the questions I get the most these days, if I do a public event or if I'm doing a Q&A online or whatever, is people say to me, where do you get your news? How do you know what to believe? And I find
well, I would never ask Dave Rubin that.
More difficult to answer that. We're all going into our little ideological echo chambers. I do my best to not be in there all the time.
Oh, get the fuck out of here.
It's getting tough for everybody. And as I often say, if you're watching MSNBC, you basically live in a different world as the Fox News person. And I think everyone right now,
I do agree with that.
Struggling with
Yes.
this.
I don't think that people should consume too much of either of those. It used to be that the news wasn't a 24-hour panic attack. So
I think if you have to choose one of them, you should choose MSNBC. But like Dave said, you shouldn't choose just one. Like, you should get your news from a variety of sources, preferably like a big national, well-known news outlet, something like USA Today.
So the book, for that reason, feels very relevant because I think everyone's going through some version of a conspiracy theory to some extent.
Yeah, well, so here's one solution.
God, why do these people always have such shitty audio?
Papers every day. I get the New York Times, or say the New York Times. Oh, where's my Wall Street?
And why does he have a gaming chair?
Okay, I got my Wall Street Journal. Oh, here it is. And the Wall Street Journal.
The same chair as me.
And why is he showing off that nobody buys his book? I don't understand.
Get the truth.
So in my estimation,
He bought that chair at Staples, by the way. This is Staples' in-house brand emerge.
Really off the deep end, as you know, Barry Weiss. They were so out of control that Barry Weiss, as a liberal, felt she couldn't even stay there anymore. Yeah. So
Barry
I'm pretty
Weiss,
sure that's Staples' in-house brand. Whatever,
Barry,
it doesn't matter.
We're talking about the thing on the screen. Barry Weiss left the New York Times and lied about why she left. She claimed that she was harassed in the company's Slack. You know how we know she lied? The outgoing CEO of New York Times, it just happens that he quit as the CEO around the same time she quit. He went on Peter Kafka's show Recode and said that they scoured the Slack and asked her for examples of her being harassed in Slack. And they couldn't find any of it. She had even claimed some of the harassment was anti-Semitic in nature. And he was like, we couldn't find it. She hasn't presented any evidence. You notice on Twitter, she didn't say anything about it. She didn't give any screenshots or say who was doing it. She's like, he was like, there are a lot of people there that didn't get along with her, but that's different than harassment and anti-Semitism in our Slack, which we wouldn't tolerate. So she quit because she knew that she could grift better if she was like on Substack or whatever. That's why she quit. She didn't quit because it was
Do you think
crazy.
that's why?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Or she quit because people were dunking on her on Twitter all the time, which is not an official.
That's probably what I would guess.
And I mean, I know it's really, every time I log into Twitter, I'm like, is this the New York Times Slack channel?
So when you pick up the New York Times, are you basically going, all right, they screwed this one up. That's a deflection. This is a confusion, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, the Wall Street Journal, separating the opinion section from the news section, they're both biased in each direction that we all know about. And that's true for any of the news sources you might want to name. You have to separate just even Fox News. If you just take the daytime news reporters, they're very different from the evening, more like entertainers. So I think if you know what you're looking at, but my point is you can't rely on any one source. You have to go to multiple sources, including online sources, and just evaluate them. And there are sites that evaluate the bias, liberal or conservative bias of different media sources. And you just have to do that. And NPR, I don't trust so much anymore. AP, Associated Press, I feel is fairly objective about how they present things. No one's completely unbiased, of course, but so multiple sources. I mean, and that now there's so many online. Really, you just have to kind of do a little bit of your own fact checking. And if you can do,
Well, isn't that almost one of the biggest problems we have in this technological adolescence that we're in, that the average person, that even if they want to stay informed on current events, what's going on in the world, the economy, whatever it might be, they don't have the time to go, okay, I'm going to read the Times and the Wall Street Journal, and I'll see what they're saying on Fox and MSNBC. And then they just kind of put their hands up and they check out. I think we're getting a lot of that, actually.
So the subtitle of the book, Why the Rational Believe the Irrational. My point is that people that believe conspiracy theories are not tinfoil hat idiots. They're me and you. Everybody. Surveys show everybody believes at least one conspiracy theory. And one reason for that is my constructive conspiracism. A lot of them are true. So
right, but the idea, the conspiracy thing, once it's true, it's just a conspiracy.
Well, I would say it's still a conspiracy theory, but there's a big difference between like being a conspiracy theorist and, you know, believing that a well-documented conspiracy is true.
Or that even a not very well-documented conspiracy might be possible.
Yeah.
Like people are conspiring to do evil shit right now as we fucking sit here.
Yep.
There is no shortage of people conspiring to do evil shit to fuck you over. It's just that conspiracy theories, I think the defining thing, and Shermer's not going to touch on this. It's like he doesn't understand. The thing about them is the community part that's the problem. That's what the internet brought us, is the sort of almost cult-like behavior in some of these conspiracy communities where you show up, you say, oh, I just woke up, I just learned about this thing, and then you get kind of love-bombed like you do in a cult where the conspiracy theorists are like, oh, now you're awake and aware. And that's the fucking thing that's the thing that like sucks people in, I think, more than just the, oh, I know something you don't know, because everybody thinks they know something somebody else doesn't know, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely like people who, especially people who are in a situation, like a bad situation where they could use that kind of community support. They're so like susceptible to that conspiracy thinking, and the conspiracy theorists will just prey on that when they're trying to recruit more conspiracy theorists.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, people's families like sometimes ostracize them when they start going down the rabbit hole, but like, I don't know, like at some point, what else can you do? You know what I'm saying? If like your uncle always is talking about QAnon or the chemtrails or whatever, you just stop inviting that uncle because, you know, maybe one of your other family members is like an airline mechanic and they're like, that's stupid. And you just don't want to deal with that shit. And the airline mechanic isn't like popping off at the mouth at the dinner table, you know?
Yeah, like essentially there is nothing you can do other than to ostracize them. So that is the best
it pays
solution.
To be a little constructively paranoid, just in case. But so for the most part, most people are rational about their daily lives. You know, they get the kids off to school, they hold jobs, you know, they keep gas in the tank and food in the fridge, and they have a social life, and they're just normal. About things that they could do something about. Now, if you take some of the big conspiracy theories, like the rigged election, say, of 2020, how would I check that to know what's going on? You have to rely on sources that have the resources and access to fact check things like that. I wouldn't even know who to call in Ohio or Georgia or Arizona to ask, you know, what about that truck that pulled up at 3 a.m, because that grainy video was kind of suspicious, you know.
But the idea that he's personally going to call someone to ask about, that's a dumb way. Like, what the fuck is he talking about, you know? Like, I know what he's
also, like, you don't need to fact check something that has no evidence. Like, just ask for the evidence, and that's fact checking enough, right?
Right. But the thing is, like I think the truck incident he's talking about was like some truck pulled into a voting center. Well, that's the truck pulled into the voting center, but so what? Like, what was in the truck? Maybe votes, maybe other things they need there. Maybe the voting center is no longer going to be the voting center in 2 days, and the truck pulled in with equipment for whoever's renting it next. Who knows?
I do believe that since ballots are physical objects that exist in the world, they do need to be transported generally on wheels.
Right. You could walk it to the ballot box, but trying to walk all the ballot boxes to the voting center is a bad idea.
Yep.
Here we rely on people that we should trust, and we have traditionally, maybe not so much anymore. But for me, whatever questions I had were put to rest when Attorney General Bill Barr said, well, you know, we had the entire resources of the Department of Justice, and we looked into it. And we looked here and we checked that and so on and so forth, didn't find anything. It's like, okay, well, end of story, as far as I was concerned. Now, it's not
what do you say to the people that will go, well, Bill Barr is just part of the machine that would produce that sort of lie? Because that, of course...
okay, what you say to them is that, well, now you've just made the conspiracy bigger by one person. No, you know what I'm saying? It's like the fallback of the conspiracists is that as soon as like the information is presented that counters their narrative, all of a sudden the source of that information is in on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's super easy. You just wave it away that way.
As you know, you're the expert in this. I mean, conspiracies, they jump from one sort of seeming dead end to a new place, and then a new place and a new place and a new place.
So what do you say? Well, what I say is, well, then who do you trust? What is your source? You know, if you don't trust the entire Department of Justice, if you don't trust the Trump-appointed Attorney General or all the Trump-appointed judges in the cases that he brought before the courts, and so on, who would you trust, and why would you trust somebody else if not them? I like quoting Christopher Hitchens when he says, which he got from somebody else, which was that if you hear the Pope say he believes in God today, you think, well, the Pope's doing his job again today. It's what he's supposed to do. But if you hear the Pope say, you know, I'm beginning to have some doubts about God's existence, you think, he might be onto something, right? So when somebody on your team or somebody you trust says something that you can pretty much count on, if Bill Barr said, "Hey, I found some suspicion," well, of course he's a Trump-appointed Republican. Maybe we need another source. But if he says, if he would be motivated to find fraud, and he didn't, then to me that ups the probability that there was no fraud in the election. That's just kind of how to think about that kind of conspiracy theory.
Right. So since we're talking about the election, and I do think so much of what we now talk about related to fake news and this confusion has to do with the election, what would you say about the 4 years that Trump was president, when basically half of the media or all of the mainstream media in essence was saying either he was a Russian plant or that election was illegitimate or stolen. And then the second those people were on the other side, now we have Biden as president, they
didn't say the election was stolen.
Yeah, they said the election was influenced, which is a very different thing than stolen.
And
like all of the votes were actually votes.
Right. And
like no one was saying otherwise.
And not for nothing, countries engaging in propaganda campaigns to meddle with the politics of other countries very much predates the internet. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, that's not even really a conspiracy. Like we definitely know that happens. I mean, yes, it's a conspiracy, but it's like you were saying, when it's proven true, it goes from conspiracy theory to just plain conspiracy.
Right.
Well, that was pretty conclusively proven that Russia did meddle in the election. Whether they had a big influence, we can't prove. So,
right.
No one knows.
And the other thing, the media was just reporting on what the investigation was finding. Mostly. There were people that went fucking off the hook, like fucking Rachel Maddow just like threw her career away essentially. Russia. Like her show got so bad. But she's like the only one I can think of off the top of my head, because otherwise it was just reporting on what was being leaked from the investigation. And so they're just reporting on what the people doing the investigation were saying. Was it overhyped? Absolutely. But that's what happens when you have 3 24-hour panic attack news channels. I mean, they got to fill the time somehow.
Question anything, and you're going to be booted off Twitter and YouTube and everywhere else if you do.
That's pretty predictable. Everybody does that. If you go back in time, decades, pretty much every losing side in a presidential election or even congressional races and senatorial races, the losing side thinks the other side did something. There was some shenanigans, there was some, and then they usually drop it after a few months and focus on the next election or whatever. So what's unusual this time is that, Trump continues with the conspiracy theory. But let's not blame Republicans, because Democrats do this also. Mm-hmm. It's pretty common because, again, it's so complex. There's so many moving parts.
Do Democrats do that though? Election. Like, when's the last time the Democrats tried to overthrow the government?
Yeah, it's a false. They're just doing a false equivalence here. Like covering the Mueller investigation is not the same as going around everywhere and saying the election was fraudulent.
Yeah.
Even over-covering the Mueller investigation is not the same thing as going around telling everybody the election was fraudulent.
Yep.
No one has access to all the information. So, there's always going to be some anomalies, and then people go anomaly hunting, as we call it. And then you can always find them no matter what. Again, that blurry video of the truck that pulled up at 3. What is that? Okay, he had a box. Okay, there's always something like that. So we have to. So part of the problem is the lack of trust. We've always had trust in our systems that, for the most part, they work pretty well. And so that's. But again, like with Trump, I've been pretty critical of Trump, particularly since in that last year. But pretty much everything else he did was pretty standard Republican stuff. Always lowering taxes. He's helping rich people get richer. He's tightening up the borders, foreign policy, and so on. It's like, that's his job, like the Pope. That's his job. That's what he's supposed to do. So it's only when George H.W. Bush said, read my lips, no new taxes. Then he raised taxes. Like, what? You're a Republican. You're not supposed to do that.
I would say, there were a few times in Trump's presidency where he did things that were very much out of character for any president.
Right. Like
violating the emoluments clause constantly and in public.
Or I'm thinking about like during COVID when he was like up on stage telling everybody that hydroxychloroquine worked, even though like all of his science advisors were probably telling him that it doesn't work, and that there's not that it doesn't work, that there's no evidence for the claim that it works. So there were, if he doesn't see it, then he's just high on his own supply of enlightened centrism. And the other thing is, again, and I think we've said this about Shermer, or at least I've said it about Shermer, he's like almost like locked in like the new atheism like phase of thinking about conspiracy theories, right? It's like pre-QAnon, pre-Pizzagate, even before the golden age of chemtrails happened, right? Like his understanding of conspiracy theories is almost 20 years old, it seems like. It seems like he hasn't kind of kept an eye on what these conspiracy movements are doing since, I don't know, 2004 or something. It's just a very kind of antiquated, like guy in a tinfoil hat on the street corner version of conspiracism. And that's not what it is anymore. It's fucking big business is what it is.
And Trump, deregulation of the economy, that was pretty standard Republican stuff. And Biden's doing what Democrats do, right? I mean, so, it's not fair to criticize either one as being extremist when most of the policies they're doing is pretty standard.
What do you think?
I would entirely disagree. Trump is an extremist.
Yeah, his rhetoric was just very extreme, whereas Biden's rhetoric tends to be fairly milquetoast.
Like even some of his policies were extremist, but I wouldn't say that like all of his policies were extremist. But that's not what it means to be an extremist.
Right. You can do just one or two things and that pins you as an extremist.
Yeah.
What do you think we can do, or not we, I suppose, the whatever mainstream institutions that still exist at this point, and it's hard to tell to what degree they exist anymore, who's watching these things, how much influence do they have? How could they gain back trust? I think in most cases, if you were to take, say, the New York Times or CNN, I don't think there's a way back now. I think they've gone so all in on so much confusion and been so exposed as partisan players that I don't know that they can come back from that. And maybe they shouldn't.
I don't know. Well, okay. So, but I'd say Fox News has the same problem. They've kind of dialed into a business model of, ramping up the extremism on their side. I don't know. The Russia, you mentioned, Russian Gate and all that stuff, all those accusations against Trump, most of which did not pan out. Those were conspiracy theories. We think this happened and it turned out, the Mueller report and so on. Oh, well, okay, that was kind of a nothing burger. That doesn't help. Right.
But it wasn't nothing. At the end, Mueller, I think we talked about this last week, where Mueller kicked it over to Congress and was like, we can't indict a sitting president.
Yeah. And there are also like 38 indictments of other people or something.
It wasn't nothing. It's just that if it was like either the president gets perp walked, like Mueller goes into the White House by himself and goes in and like wrestles Donald away from Ivanka and fucking puts him in handcuffs and takes him out well, if that's the fucking standard, then yeah, if it was either that or nothing, then I guess sure, it was nothing.
Yeah.
So that if you actually get something, it's like, yeah, well, you cried wolf so many times.
There were like 10 counts of obstruction of justice that he was like, go ahead, Congress, it's your job to prosecute him. And Congress was like, nah.
I mean, he was impeached twice.
Not for that.
I know.
I see it as an erosion of trust across the board. Scientists used to be trusted. The CDC used to be trusted. Teachers, professors, the academy used to be, high in trust. Not anymore.
And why the fuck aren't they now? Whose side is it telling you don't trust the CDC?
Yeah, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where you spend a lot of your time in one of your missions, especially the IDW. Their big mission was like and Eric and Brett even say it like specifically that they're against these institutions because, in their case, it's personal grievance because they weren't just handed Nobel Prizes, but but like this is a thing of like the conspiracy industrial complex, be it the IDW or Alex Jones or anything in between, really has created this set of circumstances. I trust the CDC.
Yeah, I do too. I follow their guidelines.
They get most things right, and when they get things wrong, they update the recommendations because, like during COVID, for example, everything was like unfolding pretty quickly, and nobody had really good information at the beginning, and some of the stuff was wrong, but then it just got adjusted to the right thing later. Isn't that what an institution's supposed to do?
And there's a reason that at the beginning we were all calling it the novel coronavirus. Because it was new.
Yeah, it was brand new.
We didn't know anything about it. All we knew was that it was a coronavirus.
Fertile ground for conspiracism, yet here's Shermer like playing into the conspiracy.
Yep.
That's a hard problem, but I sign on with Jonathan Rauch's The Constitution of Knowledge. I think you had Jonathan on your show.
We talked briefly once. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But this kind of commitment to, like in journalism, fact checking, in science, peer review, in the judicial system, a fair confrontational trial between two attorneys, to get to the truth, and a jury of your peers and so on. So there's, here's kind of the conservative argument for maintaining institutions that have been around for decades or centuries. And the reason we keep them is because they work. We've been tweaking them for centuries. The legal system, the criminal justice system, journalism, really, maybe a century.
I mean, those
standards.
The legal system and the criminal justice system work for some people.
Yeah, I mean they, and just to some extent they improve over time, right? But that doesn't.
That would be hard to say. I don't know if it's improved.
Fact checking and editors and things like that. That.
Yeah, maybe to some extent. Yeah.
And we just have to keep pushing back. That is.
But overall,
not cool to make assertions without any evidence at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm guessing. I think you either read. Well, you certainly read it, or maybe wrote a review of it. Even in Jordan Peterson's last book, in 12 More Rules. I think the first of the new set of rules. Is in essence, you got to be careful when you're burning down institutions because you don't know what will come on the other side. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now. We don't trust the old institutions, but we don't know exactly what the new institutions are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's classic Burkean conservatism. And when Burke defended the U.S. Revolution, the Revolutionary War, but not the French Revolution. And he was right, because they tore down everything. Let's just start over, all the way down to a new calendar system, and new titles and new days of the week. Everything's going to be different, and that didn't pan out so well. So, and again, certain institutions have been around for a long time. And they've been tweaked here and there to be more efficient and fair and just and so on. We should not overthrow them too easily. And
so you mentioned science before, and as a man of science and a man who likes facts, having been through 2 years of COVID, and you are in California, which I fled because of COVID and lockdowns and masks and injections, mandated injections, all of these things that I felt had nothing to do with science.
None of that is what happened, though.
Like, masks were mandated for a little while. When were vaccines ever mandated?
I guess, like, if you worked for the government or whatever, they made you get it. But, like, your people have to do shit they don't want to do for their job all the time.
Yeah, but he worked for himself.
Yeah. And
did he mandate vaccines in his own business and then run away from California to get away from himself?
That's a good question. I don't even know if he's vaccinated or not. I feel like what he said though, like we've been talking about this for a long time. The idea that there were any lockdowns was just ridiculous. Like, I went out every day. I rode my bike every day. If I was locked down, I would have been arrested for riding my bike. Like the Gestapo would have come and fucking got me and shit. It's just not true. You weren't not locked down. It was like people were encouraged to stay at home to the extent that they could. The store was still open. You could go to the fucking grocery store. Like,
yep.
I think or virtually nothing to do with science or a abuse of science, let's say.
No, isolation works to stop the spread of a respiratory disease. What is this guy talking about?
I think the scientific world is right now. I mean, Fauci just in the last couple of days saying, "Oh, I was never for lockdowns," and then it's like we're playing videos on the show where he's calling for lockdowns a year ago. I remember when he said, "When you criticize me, I am the science. You're criticizing science."
Yeah, so it's been a problem for the reputation of science, I guess, because the CDC says one thing and then changes its mind, or Fauci says, no mask, then mask, then no mask.
Wait, no. They didn't change their mind. They changed their recommendations when new information came in. What do you mean the CDC just changed its mind? What is it, the Borg? Like what does that mean?
It just decided, you know what? Don't really need that. No, yeah, exactly like you said. New information came in, new evidence, and they updated their guidelines to reflect the new evidence. Why is that so hard to understand? Is it like we don't now believe that we should be bloodletting, right?
Right.
No one believes that. There's not a single person on earth, I would guess, who actually believes that you should be bloodletting if you have like a cold, right?
Right.
So why the fuck do people have issue with new evidence leading to new recommendations?
Right. Isn't that what the scientific method is supposed to provide us?
Yes, that is the feature of the scientific method that makes it so great.
Okay, let's just step aside from particular individuals like Fauci and just say in general, if you don't know what's going on, and we didn't, what was this, January 2020 to March is when we were kind of realizing, okay, there's something big happening here. What is it? And it took a long time to figure out what's the right thing to do. There's so much uncertainty and so much unpredictability in complex systems like the human body of, why do some people who get the virus who double vax boosted, they lead clean, healthy lives, they're isolated, masked, and they get it anyway. And I know people that didn't do anything. They didn't change their life at all, never wore a mask, and they get it, nothing happens, right? So it's like, okay, because there's variation. The body's a complex system and people respond differently. And so these are on average.
But public policy can't be like boutique healthcare for the individual. Like, what the fuck? This shows like just a fundamental, either like possibly purposeful misunderstanding of what public policy is supposed to be. It's supposed to provide.
I think that's what he's saying, right? That these are recommendations in general for the average person.
Recommendations, and I try to be sympathetic by putting myself in somebody. If I was a public policy person, if I was the head of a health institute, or I was the mayor of the city of LA, say, or governor of California, and they stick a microphone in your face and go, okay, what do we do? So here you have kind of a type 1, type 2 error problem, signal detection problem. If I say,
but also, if you pause it for a second, none of them ever said, if you follow these guidelines, you will not get COVID. None of them ever said that. The guidelines were to help prevent the spread of COVID.
Right. And if the spread of the disease is mitigated by public health measures, you as an individual are less likely to get it, but that doesn't make it zero, right?
Yeah.
It's
the same with the vaccine. The vaccine never claimed to be 100% effective against catching the disease.
Right. It to some extent it prevented the spread, but mostly it kept people from going to the hospital.
Yep. And it was
Turns out
extremely
it's like
effective at
Ebola
that.
Or AIDS. Remember, AIDS was 100% fatal at first. What if it turns out like that, and I really screwed up and it's on me? So they're more likely to err on the other side. Like let's err on the side of making a type 1 error. Assume it's going to be terrible. And if it isn't, well, we got lucky. Of course, they're not calculating into the equation the effects of lockdown, isolation.
There was no lockdown, and it was terrible. 1 million Americans died. That's terrible.
That's about 1 out of every 350 Americans.
Masks, school closes, economic effects, and so on, which I think we're years away from knowing what the full effects will be. So far, it looks like it has damaged our economy and other things. School kids are behind, and social attitudes about youngsters and how they interact with each other. There's some studies coming out now showing, these kids just coming into college now. I have freshmen myself. They're very different than they were a few years ago. It's hard to say what the cause is, but social isolation during COVID might be one. Anyway, those are the kinds.
Wait, I'm curious though. How are you seeing that manifested in your students now from say 5 years ago?
Super quiet, very, very reticent to say anything. There may be some cancel culture effects there. People, because I bring up abortion, like we just did an issue on abortion. So, pro-life, pro-choice. All right, kids, let's talk about it. And they're like, hey,
wow.
I mean, that's a pretty touchy subject for a lot of people. Why is that surprising?
And maybe what's his class supposed to be about? Like, is his, like, they were like, I think he teaches a class like on critical thinking or something, right? And so like, they're like, oh, I thought we came in here because the guy who runs Skeptic magazine was going to teach us a class on critical thinking, and now he's asking us our opinion on abortion. Maybe they're like, huh?
Yeah, they might be shocked.
They might be like, what the fuck is going on here?
How can you not have an opinion on
and you're at Chapman, which is a great defender of free speech. I mean, one of the few universities that is.
Yeah, so here this is reflecting more of a bottom-up kind of cultural shift, I think. Maybe they're just shy, I don't know. But, yesterday one of my student TED Talks was on attractiveness, lookism. Why is it that good-looking people get more benefits than others? Like, all right, you got to have an opinion on this, right? Here's Brad Pitt. That's so unfair. What are you going to do about Brad Pitt? And they're looking.
It sounds like this guy uses his class as a soapbox.
Are you surprised?
That's why isn't, I mean, maybe these things just kind of come up and he's doing other stuff, talking about logical fallacies or whatever, because you can only like spend so much time talking about formal and informal logical fallacies. I guess you got to like use real world examples, but it just seems like maybe the kids don't want to talk about this shit with him because that's not what they thought the class was about. And they're like, well, we could do, this is actually, we take humanities classes, sir.
I don't want to say anything. I'm like, oh, come on, man. So it could be some of that. We do know there's an uptick in depression and cutting, suicidal ideation, particularly amongst girls. Is it social media? Is it Facebook? Is it social isolation during COVID? There's different factors.
I mean, by Instagram's own study, it's partially them.
Right. And again, it's not one of those things, right? It's probably to some extent all of those things.
Yeah.
To that.
I'm curious how much of this, say, related to COVID was people that maybe weren't qualified or in some ways were overqualified to giving information. So an example I would use is right when the pandemic happened, I had a bunch of experts on, people that are fairly well known, and they were talking about how to wash your bags when you leave the grocery store and perfectly, put your mask on this way, and talking about social distancing, a phrase that no one had really uttered before, and all of these strange things, and lockdowns, which really had never been done before at scale and were based on basically some wonky paper that never meant anything. But everyone
some wonky paper that never meant anything. It had never been done. Does this guy not know like that these same measures were implemented during the flu of 1913? That many of these same measures were
1918, I think it was.
Yeah. In the early 1900s, a lot of these same measures were implemented. It's just there was no internet, and there weren't a bunch of talking heads telling you that this was stupid, or whatever, right?
Yeah. Those same measures also were implemented during MERS and SARS in the earlier 2000s, maybe not in the United States, but in the places where those things were spreading very rapidly, those measures were taken. And that's why we knew that they were effective.
Right.
Then when we find out it doesn't work, everyone just looks at the expert class and goes, and I'm not talking about the Faucis or even the CDCs, I'm just talking about the general people who are the tastemakers.
I mean, it pretty clearly does work, because there was a study recently about the difference in localities that were heavily in favor of Trump versus localities that were heavily in favor of Biden during this time, where it correlated very well. Like, being in a locality that favored Trump correlated very well with not having any lockdown measures, and also not obeying them if you did. And the death rate in those regions were much higher than the death rate in regions that were in favor of Biden, where they did have more restrictive measures and they did follow them.
Right. For example, Santa Clara County was one of the first to do a stay at home thing, right? And Santa Clara County actually did pretty well as far as COVID versus other counties, and even other counties where they did a stay at home thing, where they waited longer, they didn't do as well. San Francisco, someone in the chat is saying, also did very well with COVID, and that's a dense fucking place.
Yep. So Dave Rubin is just really, really incredibly wrong right here, which is, par for the course for him.
Us all terribly.
Right. So whenever there's uncertainty about the cause of something, let's say autism, one reason vaccines got associated with autism is because we don't know the cause of autism. We still don't. There's probably multiple causes, some genetic predispositions. Who knows? In the womb chemistry, I don't know. We don't know. But so then anything that's even loosely associated then gets affiliated as a causal vector. And I think we see a lot of that in pandemics like this, where you just don't know. Remember when AIDS first came online, I mean, there was like panic. Oh, you shouldn't go in the swimming pool. I remember when Greg Louganis cut his head on the diving board, and Barbara Walters was doing this private one-on-one interview with him, and he talked about this. She's, oh my God, Greg, you went in the pool? Right. Because at the time, it's like, it could spread through water, the air. Don't get on a bus with an AIDS patient. It's a gay disease. All this crazy stuff. There was conspiracy theories about it. The black community, that the CIA was up to something with AIDS. And, but these are not completely crazy. This is under my rubric of constructive conspiracism.
Yeah.
Because the Tuskegee experiments, where they, withheld treatments to African Americans with syphilis, and other shenanigans that the CIA and the FBI have done to infiltrate black activist groups, to blackmail Martin Luther King Jr. and threaten if he doesn't kill himself, they're going to expose. They made sex tapes of him in hotel rooms with women and said, we're going to play these publicly if you don't kill yourself. This is our government did this. So it's not completely crazy for people who, I don't trust the government. It's like, yeah, okay, I understand.
But the problem with that and the COVID stuff is it wasn't just the government telling you this stuff. Private universities were also have virology departments, and they're not run by the government.
Yeah, and hospitals, medical foundations, they were all saying the same thing. And basically every medical expert was saying the same thing. You had a few fringe people that were loudly going against the recommendations of all the other medical experts, and those were the people who were being propped up by the conspiracy communities. But the vast majority of medical experts were saying we need some sort of measures to fight against the spread of this disease.
Right, but Dave Rubin's guest list was the crazies, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, in essence, by the end of reading this, most people will be a little more libertarian, perhaps.
Well,
Because you
at
do
least-
go into several
yes.
other examples of that, about how governments have been
yes.
doing this.
Oh, yes, right. MK Ultra, CIA dosing U.S. citizens with LSD just to see what would happen. They actually set up in brothels. They had these Johns coming, and they would dose them with LSD, and then film them having sex with prostitutes. Let's see what happens here, right? It was all under this kind of larger plan that you remember the missile gap. Well, this was the mind control gap. The Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans are ahead of us on mind control drugs, so we got to do experiments on this. So again, no congressional approval. People didn't know about it. President didn't even know about it. This is just like rogue factions in the security state doing this. So when people talk about the deep state, there's people behind the scenes doing things. Well, historically, that has happened, right? That's just MK Ultra. That's just one. This counterintelligence program, this COINTELPRO, was another. Let's plant some people in these social justice groups, like the Black Panthers, AIM, the American Indian Movement, feminist groups, and so on, and just to make them look bad, or essentially create like a false flag operation. Let's send in one of our guys. They'll do something really stupid, and then this will get on the show, covered in the media, and then they'll look bad. I mean, this is like what our government does this. Yeah.
Do you think it's odd that these things are not discussed more? I mean, you go into all of these things in the book, but fringe internet people talk about these things. Guys that run Skeptic magazine talk about these things. But in a time where we've
What?
the institution.
What the fuck? There are like mainstream podcasts and like mainstream video series and documentaries that you can see about MK Ultra and like the COINTELPRO and all that. Like, what is he talking about?
Yes, you are correct. I really don't know what he means by that. I think he means not dwelling on it.
Yeah. Or not using it as a reason to believe something else is true.
Yeah.
People would be wise to be a bit more skeptical about the information they're being fed.
Yeah, you should be. Right. So I think of it as a signal detection problem. That is, the signals you're getting in versus the noise. Is it a real pattern or is it not?
Okay, so we've talked about this a few times. Do you think he's using the big, nice microphone that's in front of his face, or is he just going through the mic on the cord of his earbuds?
I don't know. What I'm noticing about the sound actually is like when he starts talking, it's like loud and kind of overdriven, and then it calms down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you think that's like some sort of noise canceling in the earbuds?
Maybe. I don't know. We've talked about this. I've talked about this with a couple people, that maybe having less than perfect audio sort of makes people think that they're on the call too, because they're used to Zoom calls with people just using their laptop computer. So they kind of feel like they're talking to their friend or whatever. And it makes it seem like more approachable or whatever. Whereas like really good audio, maybe it signals to people that this is overproduced,
But like, why have professional audio equipment in front of you if you're just going to sound like trash anyway?
Yeah, I don't know. It could also, someone in the chat is saying it could also be on Ruben's side where he's running some weird compressor.
That could be true, yeah.
Theory that represents a real conspiracy. Is that true or not? And so my argument is that, it's probably better to err on the side of being trigger happy, like assume it's real when it's not, because that's a less costly mistake to make than miss the real conspiracy. Somebody in your company is conspiring to hold you down, or some other company is conspiring against your company, or whatever.
I don't think that's always true. Like, he's saying that like it's always true, but I think if you're weighing the risks of believing a conspiracy, it highly depends on the conspiracy. Right?
Like it's like I always bring up like Bigfoot or believing in aliens, and the risks there are not very high, right? Like the people that believe in Bigfoot and aliens and no other conspiracies, they're probably cool, right? They're not.
Yeah. But if you believe that like your doctor is going to kill you if you go in and get your foot examined when your foot's all broken and bleeding, like that conspiracy belief is going to harm you.
Right. And so, yeah, it's case by case basis for sure.
Just look at, what the CIA did in, rigged election. Well, the CIA used to try to rig elections in South American countries to favor fascist dictators over communist dictators because they were friendlier to American business interests in those countries. And, and again, this was all under the radar. No one knew about it until, decades later when it was exposed. And so that's that constructive conspiracism.
It's almost as if things might be going on now that we don't know exactly what's happening.
I have no doubt this is
There's a lot of things going on right now that Dave Rubin doesn't understand.
Somebody does a Freedom of Information Act, FOIA request and finds out, oh my God, in 2022, you know what the CDC or whoever was up to? Oh, okay. No, I didn't know that.
Where do you think social media, or how do you think social media plays a part in all of this? One of the things, just in terms of the way the internet's structured, that I always think about is I remember the internet when it started, or started on basic AOL or Prodigy or something.
It would be really weird to think that the government was planning a deep state conspiracy to get us all to wash our hands.
Right. And it turned out that washing your hands wasn't that important to stop the spread of COVID, but they were still giving good advice that you should regularly wash your hands.
Yeah. Even if that doesn't have any benefit against COVID, it's not hurting you.
Right. It's good advice anyway.
And the flu season during the pandemic year was essentially non-existent because people were wearing masks, they were washing their hands, flu didn't spread.
It, meaning you could scroll for a certain period of time and then it would stop. Then we got infinite scroll. So more and more and more kept coming. If you're on Twitter, you can go more and more and more. That rabbit hole is endless now. And I think a lot of that probably also feeds a certain part of the brain that would lead people to some of these ideas.
Yeah, it does. The history of conspiracism, there's always been conspiracy theories, nothing new there. But the spread of them in real time and the depth that people could go, I talk about in the book of the JFK conspiracy theorists, back in the 60s and 70s, they're just meeting in little hotel conference rooms with 24 people, and they have their little mimeograph newsletters that they mail out, And so not very many people, knew about this or were into it. Now you can reach, millions of people instantly in real time. And so the spread is more rapid. The kind of going down the rabbit hole, the siloing off of people into these communities that it's hard to penetrate. That's the harder part.
Is it, do you think, also easier to debunk some of these things because of the speed of information? Just as fast as it can spread, it can also be debunked that much more quickly?
Yeah, to me, that's the only solution, is that because I'm not in favor of censorship.
What's that saying? The fucking lie travels the earth before the truth ties its shoes. Is that the saying?
Yep. The lie travels the earth before the truth gets out of bed or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. But yeah, the thing is, Facebook is their algorithm rewards things that make you angry. So a conspiracy theory is going to make you angry. A lie is going to make you angry. But the truth about it is going to make you go, oh, okay. And you're not going to share it. You're not going to share the truth. So the algorithm rewards things that cause people to share things and like things and comment on it. Oh, I'm so upset about this.
Yeah. And, it's in their business interest to do that. So that's, easy enough to figure out. This is very, this conversation is frustrating too, because Dave Rubin is a peddler of conspiracy theories.
Yep.
Social media, because they said the wrong thing. This doesn't help for two reasons. One, you might be wrong, and that guy that you just kicked off, he might be right. No one's omniscient. How do you know? John Stuart Mill, it's like if he who knows only his own position doesn't even know that. So it's good to listen to these other people. And then second, if you kick somebody off, cancel culture and so on, then outsiders observing this will go, I wonder if that guy has something to say. And because they're making such a big deal about it, right? Banned in Boston. Ooh, I want to read those banned books.
Right.
And so, when someone I
don't believe this either.
Robert Malone.
I think platforming someone who's spreading misinformation does more harm. He's saying if you kick them off, that's more harmful than letting them speak and correcting them. And I just completely disagree with that.
It's also like there's the error I think he's making here is that the people prone to conspiratorial thinking are going to be the ones that are saying, oh, that person must know what's up if they got kicked off, right? Because that in and of itself is a conspiracy theory. Like,
yep.
To talk about vaccines and cardio issues, everybody made a big stink about that. It's like, well, first of all, Joe's not 60 Minutes where he has to have guests on each side or whatever. It's not what he does. You know that going in.
But wait, 60 Minutes doesn't. The fairness. What the fuck? The fairness doctrine ended in the 80s or some shit. What is he talking about?
Remember a while ago when you said that he hadn't updated his views on whatever thing since 2004?
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And so, but if you make a big deal about it, now everyone wants to know, well, who is this Robert Malone guy? And what is his argument? Because no one seems to debunk it. They just say, oh, it was bad, he had him on. Well, okay, what is the problem? Nobody
seems to debunk it. Where, Shermer? On the Joe Rogan show? Yeah, nobody goes on there to debunk it.
A lot of people offer. Joe Rogan just doesn't accept.
And the one person he had on was Sanjay Gupta, but Sanjay Gupta seemed very unprepared for the conspiratorial thinking that was going to be presented to him. They didn't have somebody from science-based medicine or something on there who those people are not only, subject matter experts, but they're also they study conspiracism and they debunk conspiracy theories on their website, medical conspiracy theories primarily. So it's people did debunk. We debunked Robert Malone's claim that he himself invented mRNA. We debunked it right on this show. The chat did it. It was late one night and chat was like, he was on a team that did some research, but it seems like these two people are mostly responsible for the mRNA vaccine technology that we see coming out today. And again, that was probably wrong too, because those two people were just heading up a team or two different teams that were working together. Probably hundreds of people, thousands of people. So
yep.
Somebody should say, here's the argument and here's the response.
And what's so interesting about that is, if you remember, so he has Dr. Malone on, who had, I think, if I'm not mistaken, more patents on mRNA technology than anybody. I mean, it's not like this guy's a kook, right?
He's a
kook.
kook.
Has him on. The media goes crazy about it because he's talking about ivermectin and all of these things. And then you remember what happened about 4 days later, where suddenly we had a week of Joe Rogan saying the N-word, and should Joe Rogan be deplatformed off Spotify and everywhere else? And that, I think, led people to believe, I don't even know that this is a conspiracy theory, but that there was some sort of coordinated attack by the corporate press on Rogan, like he was becoming too influential. So it behooved CNN to push these, Joe Rogan's a racist stories, because he's...
But it wasn't CNN doing that. It was conspiracy researchers that were trying to take him down with that stuff. It was people on Twitter, people on the Dystopia beat. It wasn't CNN doing that. They may have brought it up because it was bubbling up on Twitter, but there wasn't CNN doing that. And this is a conspiracy theory again. He's just positing a conspiracy theory, and Shermer's not like, hey, I think what you're positing is a conspiracy theory.
Isn't Shermer supposed to be the expert on conspiracy theories on this show?
He's clearly not. I'm more of an expert, I think, on conspiracy theories in the modern day.
But I mean on this episode of the Rubin Report.
Yes, he's the expert.
I mean, I don't have the documents from Zucker at CNN, but it feels like something that's kind of there.
I suspect that's not a top-down conspiracy like we think of a conspiracy theory of, the Illuminati or somebody cigarette-smoking people behind closed doors are calling the shots. And the reason I'm skeptical of most of those theories is because the world is too complex. There's too much randomness. There's too much chaos from the bottom up, and no one can control it. No one's in control. This is part of my theory, is that it's one thing to be a little afraid or anxious about there's some cabal going on of 12 people called the Illuminati running the world and doing a crappy job of it. But it's quite another to think, actually, nobody's in control. right? No one can explain the economy, why wars break. I mean, I don't think Putin even knows if he's going to use tactical nukes or not, let alone Biden or our Defense Department. Or I don't think anybody knows. It's just impossible to know. So
Do you view that as, is that scarier or more comforting if
Well,
nobody's in control?
I like it because I'm kind of libertarian in my personal attitudes, and it's okay with me. But people that prefer a structured hierarchical worldview that's predictable, they're not. And they tend to be more conspiratorial in their thinking, a little more paranoid, a little more suspicious that there's things going on. And again, things do go on. So how do you know? Well, my little test is, the more people that have to be involved in the conspiracy, the less likely the theory is true. The more components that have to come together just at the right time in the right place, again, it's probably not likely if a lot of things have to happen because, again, chance, chaos, contingency, accidents, people just don't do what they're supposed to do. I remember that when my first book came out, I went on G. Gordon Liddy's radio show in Washington, D.C., why people believe weird things. So, and I discussed conspiracies a little bit in there, and he asked me about it, and I said, well, you're the expert. You're Mr. Watergate. And he says, well, actually, most conspiracies are a bunch of baloney. Conspiracy theories are because people can't keep their mouth shut, and most people are incompetent. And, so this is like 9/11 truth. The Bush administration was in on 9/11. Let it happen on purpose, lie up, or made it happen on purpose, my up. Well, in fact, negative evidence, WikiLeaks, millions of classified documents, not one document about 9/11, or we know they're coming, or we're going to let it happen, or, planting explosive, nothing, right? So that tells me if it was an inside job, and these were classified documents, we would predict that there should be some leakage there. There isn't. Because most conspiracies, we do find out about them, right? Lincoln was assassinated by conspiracy. We knew within hours who did it. Same thing with Kennedy. I mean, Oswald was discovered within an hour. They had him at that theater. And so we find out about these things. But not one person wants to go on record about, the fake moon landing or 9/11 is an inside job, or not one. So that's very probably not true.
What would you say about something like the Hunter Biden laptop story where, New York...
Was Kennedy's assassination a conspiracy, though? Like, do we know that?
I think there were... I don't know. I don't remember if there were other people helping him plan. I don't recall.
Yeah, like we know who shot him, but I thought it was not known whether he was working with anyone else. Like speculated, but not known.
So here we're going to go with the Hunter Biden laptop story. I love this because I've asked people to explain it to me, and no one can even explain the conspiracy theory to me. That's why I know it's not Russian propaganda. Russian propaganda is done well.
Thought of as a reputable news organization. They say this is true. They have their sources, etc. Big tech, Twitter particularly, comes in. You can't share these stories. You can't even share them through your own private messaging, your own direct messaging on our platform. Then other platforms start doing it as well. Of course, it all turns out to be legit, and there's a lot of pretty bad stuff on there, some nasty stuff on there. I think a lot of
it did not turn out to be. It didn't all turn out to be legit. There were a lot of lies flying around about what was on Hunter Biden's laptop, and it's also not really confirmed that it was actually his laptop. It's confirmed that it was his data, but we don't know whether the data was actually recovered from a laptop or whether he just got hacked and someone released his data through this crazy laptop story.
Right, because the version that I think is what a lot of people are saying is that for some unknown reason, Hunter Biden flew from Los Angeles to fucking New Hampshire or some shit and gave 3 laptops to a blind guy. It's like, come on, dude. Like, your dad's running for president. You have someone that handles your information technology, even if you're Hunter Biden. Like, you have a guy or a girl or whatever. You know what I mean? You have someone.
Yeah, and also if you're giving your laptop to someone and then they complete the work and they want to give your laptop back to you, you wouldn't just ghost them.
Right.
Like, that's the official story from the guy. And it's like, that story doesn't make sense. So he just came in, gave you a laptop to work on. You worked on the laptop. Then you tried to get in touch with him and he ghosted you. So then you released all of the contents of the laptop to the media.
I thought there were 3 of them in the story.
I don't know.
See that as a coordinated
I've only ever heard of one.
That in essence, that thing was going to be damaging to Joe Biden. They wanted Joe Biden to be president. They wanted to be rid of Trump. We accept that big tech can just get in on this. Like, is that a conspiracy or is that
interesting?
Yeah,
that's an interesting example because here it would be a conspiracy in the traditional sense if, say, the news networks called each other and said, I'm not going to run the story. Are you going to run the story? I won't run it if you won't run it. If that was shown, that would be a more traditional definition of a conspiracy. More likely is more of kind of a cultural shift or trend. We're all liberals. We want to protect our guy. And so we're just going to bury the story. I'm going to do it and you're going to do it. It's kind of common knowledge. I don't have to call you up. You just know that, we're going to kind of work together to support our guy or criticize the other guy. That's more normal. That happens, I think, a lot without the concerted top-down, private phone calls kind of messaging to coordinate the effort. That would be my suspicion for that one.
When Alex Jones was banned after, was he banned after Sandy Hook or was he banned after?
It was after Sandy Hook for sure.
Well, I know it was after Sandy Hook. I don't remember if that was like the full impetus for it. But whenever he got banned by everybody within a day or so, I actually had Peter Thiel on my show the next day, and I asked him privately. He has since said it publicly. I said, "Well, what do you think happened here? Did they all coordinate?" And he said, "I think you'll appreciate this." He said actually what he thought was, well, once one of them did it, once I think Twitter did it first. Then it was just the signal to everybody else. Just go ahead and do it. Like now, we took the hit, we did it. So it's not.
My take on this, by the way, is that Twitter only did it when Alex Jones started. Like when Jack Dorsey was going to speak to Congress, Alex Jones harassed Jack Dorsey in person, and then then not long after that, Twitter banned Alex Jones. So. It's like when your chickens, these are just human beings that run these places. And if this guy's harassing the head of your company when he has to go to testify for Congress, I mean, if you had a mind to ban him anyway because of his other behavior, then that's just the straw that breaks the camel's back,
I thought YouTube banned Alex Jones first.
Don't remember. I think it was probably Apple Podcasts that banned him first. But I don't remember. I don't recall. But I just know that very, very shortly after Alex Jones harassed Jack Dorsey in person in Washington, D.C., he got kicked off of Twitter.
Coordinated phone call conspiracy that you're talking about. But it's some other level related to fear and manipulation and how we all operate, I suppose.
But regarding the laptop story, I think a lot of these companies probably didn't want to get blamed for like swinging the election with misinformation.
Right, because, and not for nothing, the version of the story that came out in the Post was the version with the Hunter Biden flying to this guy and giving him the physical laptops. And I don't think that happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure that happened either. It's a pretty far-fetched story, and there's not a whole lot of evidence to support it.
Again, if you're from that kind of a powerful family and your pops is running for president, you don't just drop your electronics off at a laptop repair shop. You just don't.
No.
There are people in like family friends maybe that you've known forever who handle your electronics. His laptop would probably be encrypted, right? Like,
yeah.
For doping or some horrible thing they did, and Nike drops him, and then within an hour everybody else drops him.
Yeah.
Now I don't think Nike called any of the other companies and said you got to drop the guy. They all look around and go, well, we better go, what everybody, the big guy's doing, and show our support for or a criticism of this athlete or whatever it is.
So part 2 of the way you lay out the book is how to determine which conspiracies are real. So we're sort of bouncing around a lot of that in the political sense. What about in let's get away from politics for a second, just every other sense? There's aliens and Area 51 and all the other stuff that we're all, how do you figure out what's real? You know, somebody visited you at night and they're always pronging people and all that stuff.
Yeah, right. So some of the criteria I mentioned already, you know, how many people have to be involved, how many elements have to come together at just the right moment, how conspiracies really unfold. I went into detail in that chapter on what triggered the First World War, which was a group of Serbian nationalists called the Black Hand who conspired to assassinate Franz Ferdinand, the heir apparent of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, who was leaning on Serbia to control them and so on. So this was a cabal for sure. They met in secret. They plotted for months. You know, each of the 7 guys had to go to a certain house and give the code word, and then they get the weapon, a pistol or a hand grenade, and so on. And you know, one guy he went to the wrong house. Another guy chickened out. Somebody else, you know, got the weapon but went to the wrong place on the parade route where he was supposed to stand. And then finally, some guy actually was able to pull the pin on the grenade and throw it, but it bounced off the Archduke's back of his car, rolled under the car behind him and blew up there. And so these people got hurt. Oh no. And then the car zooms off and he goes off to his little meeting, gives a speech, says, "Thanks a lot. I come here to Sarajevo and you guys throw bombs at me." and then he leaves and then said, "Hey, we better go back to the hospital and check on our comrades." So the driver goes back down the same road that they were at, and he turns right on the Alpel Quay, the main drag there, where the last conspirator, this Gabriel Princip, was sitting there despondent, eating a sandwich from this deli, and he's got his pistol in his pocket, and he's like, "Well, that was a big fuck up. Nothing happened." And then all of a sudden, here comes the car. And the car makes a wrong turn, and there was no reverse in it, so the driver puts it in neutral and just backs up at like 1 mile an hour right in front of this Gabriel Princip. He's like, "Oh my God, bam, dead." That's how these things normally go, right? You know, I mean, Nixon with the you know, the G men and the FBI couldn't even break into the Democratic Hotel at Watergate, right?
Right.
I mean, again, if those guys can't do it, and by my example, that's how things usually go. The more complex it has to be, the less likely the theory is true. 9/11 true, impossible. I mean, first of all, you'd have to have hundreds of people involved to break through the drywall of the World Trade Center building rooms to get into the structural beams and wrap them in these explosive devices, you know, which is how it's done. You know, they abandoned buildings that they demolished, they have to break them apart and put the explosive devices in there. Nobody saw that. How did, you know? Oh, they operated under the pretense of being elevator repair. It's like, I mean, now you're just hand waving. You know, it's just crazy. And not one.
It would be a lot easier just to fly a plane into the building.
I knew somebody. I was dating this guy, and he told me all about the 9/11. Oh my God, I got to have a book. I have a book out about. You know, nobody, you know, has come forth. Very, very unlikely. As opposed to 19 members of Al Qaeda with box cutters. See, so there's kind of a disparate effect between cause and effect. You know. The bigger the effect, the bigger the cause to match it, or else it just doesn't feel right. So you get, you know, JFK.
I mean, people also, like, regarding that conspiracy theory, people also don't really think about, like, you know, nowadays it's A, much harder to get into a cockpit, and B, like, no one would allow you in there. You know, if you were trying to hijack a plane, like, you would not be allowed in there. But like at the time, it's like, oh no, a dangerous person, they're trying to get into the plane. Let's just let them take the plane so they can do whatever they want. They'll get their money, they'll get their, you know, whatever, and we can go. No one was really thinking like, these people are going to fly us into a building.
Right. And not for nothing. I mean, I remember being a kid and like on a plane, while the plane was flying, I got to take a look at the cockpit. I mean, the security was just much lower pre 9/11. I think a lot of people kind of forget that. Airport security wasn't what it is now.
Yeah.
Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone nut, that doesn't feel right. So you had KGB and the FBI and the Russians and the Cubans and the mafia, and now it feels better. Princess Diana, cause of death, drunk driving, speeding, no seatbelt. Tens of thousands of people die like that every year, but princesses are not supposed to die like that, right? So it's got to be the MI6 and the royal family and Prince Charles and whoever, you know, is supposed to be in on this. And I think there's an effect like that. Like, there's no way Al Qaeda could have done that. That's actually the only way that could happen. Just somebody in the nooks and crannies of a free society that no one notices, that's how you get away with stuff.
You know, it's funny because you can also see how through pop culture some of this stuff leaks in. I mean, obviously the movie JFK was absolutely massive, and I'm sure I have no doubt that you don't agree with the conclusions that Oliver Stone was putting forth in the movie. But even I was watching The Crown on Netflix a year or so ago, and in the last season where there's a lot about Princess Di, you know, in essence, you're watching the thing and you're kind of like, yeah, it seems like they wanted to kill her, and you know, then she ends up dead. So it just sort of just sits there, and you could ruminate about all of these things.
Of course, that's a hindsight bias. You know, tons of people hated Obama, but he was assassinated. So, end of story. No one's talking about what happened to those people. Why didn't they kill him? Well, it's hard to kill a president, right?
Plenty of people would have been glad to take out Donald Trump. You know, Michael, I'm reminded of a couple of years ago. We've told this story once or twice publicly, but we were at Arizona. I think we were at Arizona State University, if I'm not mistaken. We're doing a talk on free speech, and at the top of the show, I say to the audience, I don't know, a couple hundred kids there, I say, you know, how many Democrats, how many Republicans, how many Libertarians, and then I said, how many Nazis, just to get a laugh, and one person stood up in the back and said that they were a Nazi. And I think you said, hey, you know, if you just wait to the end, we'll take your question first, and that'll be interesting, and let's see what happens. So that we end our talk, and then we take the question from the Nazi, and the Nazi had all these conspiracy theories about the Holocaust and the gas chambers and all of this stuff. I should also mention, it turned out that the Holocaust denier was also trans, which is just sort of an interesting detail, I suppose. But what you did, I thought, was really beautiful because
but trans people can be wrong too. Like, that's not a
like what's he getting at with that?
Just flat out explained why the conspiracy theory was not a conspiracy at all.
Right. And to me, that's the way to handle these kinds of things. I mean, if you tell them to shut up or sit down or silence them or kick them out, then onlookers are going to go, well, what's the story with that? What's the problem with that?
Yeah, the onlookers are going to be like, oh, if you kick the Nazi out of your event, they must be on to something. What the fuck? Come on, dude.
Point, you got to address the argument, which I did in my book on that.
And you'd been to the concentration camps, right? You'd been to Poland, where can you explain a little bit about that? Just sort of.
Oh well, so yeah, Holocaust denial or revisionism, whatever you want to call it. They're not claiming that no Jews were killed or died. They're just downgrading. From
Some of them are, yes.
Maybe 500,000. So it's a clever strategy because no matter what photos you show, like here's bodies stacked like cordwood at this concentration camp, how do you explain that? Oh, that's part of the 500,000 I'm willing to admit died of disease and starvation and overwork and so on. Oh, okay. And, you know, what about these gas chambers? Oh, those were used for delousing clothing. Okay, well, what's the difference between a delousing chamber and a homicidal gas chamber? There is a difference, but you have to know something about that, right? So it does require some knowledge. Like, could you explain why the flat earthers are wrong? Could you explain why creationists are wrong? Holocaust deniers are wrong, whatever. So you have to, so that's kind of what we specialize in at Skeptic. You know, what are the best arguments the 9/11 truthers actually have? And what's your response? How do controlled demolition buildings fall? Do they fall from the top down or the bottom up? It's the bottom up, the opposite of what we saw in the videos. Okay. So, but you have to know that kind of a little bit of detailed arcane knowledge. And so I did that with the Holocaust, and you know, it's harder to prove intention, but there's enough memos from Hitler, Himmler, Goebbels, and so on that indicate they after 1941 they intended to exterminate European Jewry. It was not just an accidental byproduct of the war, and then finally that the gas chambers were used. Well, there's 6 death camps. Here's another trick that the revisionists use. Right after the war, they said there were 21 death camps. Now they say there's only 6. The ever-diminishing death camps. Pretty soon it'll be 0. No, this is how history normally works, right? You have the kind of real-time reporting by journalists, and then the first round of books after an event or a war, then the second round, and so on. That when you get more information, you change your mind, right? So okay, it's 6, and you.
But wait, that's good. In this case, but bad when the CDC does it, when there's a pandemic.
Apparently.
Well, that's interesting.
And you can measure the Zyklon blue staining on the bricks at Majdanek, for example, and see, well, that was the chamber where they killed people. It's very different from the ones where they deloused clothing. And you just kind of go through all that. Now, when somebody at this point says, I still think the Jews, are up to no good, it's like, all right, so now you want to talk about the Jews and not the Holocaust, right? So you have to kind of bore down to see what the deeper motive is, like with QAnon or Pizzagate. there's no possible way somebody could really believe that, except that one guy, Edgar Welch, who went there with a gun to that comment.
Wait, what do you mean there's no way that people literally, that it spread like wildfire on the internet because people believed it?
Yes, many people actually believe that.
Most people say they believe it. They mean something else. Like, I don't like Democrats. I don't trust that Hillary.
I think this guy's a conspiracist denier.
Such that if I took you to the pizza place and showed you there's no pedophile ring, here's not even a basement.
He's got a conspiracy that conspiracy theorists aren't actually conspiracy believers.
Vote for Hillary. You were never going to vote for Hillary. So.
Right, and I remember after that incident at Arizona State, when we were all breaking up, I think you continued to talk to the woman. And in essence, I asked you after, well, do you think you convinced her of anything? And you basically were like, no, that's not really how it works, because the deprogramming, no matter how much you offer, in some ways is almost impossible to get to. Which I think is sort of what part 3 of the book is about.
That's right. Yeah, all you're going to do is plant a seed of doubt. Like, how did you get that idea? Where did it come from? What was the source? What's the quality of the evidence? How do you know that's true versus some other hypothesis? What it would take to change your mind, and so on. It's like cult deprogramming. Back in the 90s, they were, doing this, kidnapping the person from the cult and locking them up in a hotel room and showing them videos or whatever. It didn't work. Because that's not how it works. The people, no one joins a cult. They join a group that they think is a good thing, right? And then, months or years later, they're down the rabbit hole and they didn't even realize how extreme they got. So it's not going to happen overnight. You just have to plant a little seed, like, interesting. Yeah, I heard that. I did wonder, though. I call the Columbo thing. I have just one more question. The Detective Columbo.
Yeah.
I'm about to leave, but I just thought of one more thing I was going to ask you. And
you have to wear a brown trench coat when you're doing that, or a tan trench coat. Turn around and say it.
Right.
I'm curious, do you have a certain degree of sympathy, as you're writing a book like this, a certain degree of sympathy for the people that fall into these traps? Because, if you look, again, if we bring it back to the news, if you look at the way the mainstream media for a year said that Brett Kavanaugh is a serial rapist,
that wasn't the claim.
Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist, turned out not to be true. Jussie Smollett was going to be lynched or got attacked by those two guys, turned out he hired them. Donald Trump, very fine people on both sides. Yes, the sentence after was, I completely condemn white supremacists. All of these things that lead, I think,
that wasn't
a
the
certain
sentence.
set of good people to perhaps come to wrong conclusions, but I'm not even going to say that always. I think in some ways they then come to the right conclusion. But I always say I have sympathy for the people that are just like, yeah, these people are lying to us about so much. Mm-hmm. What else do you expect from us?
Yeah, exactly. So that's why journalism has to stick to this strict ethic of fact checking and double fact checking and multiple sources and so on. And they don't do that if it fits a particular narrative. Of course, we're highlighting the big stories they got wrong. Most of the stories they get right that are not that big or important. We fly under the radar.
So the actual quote is, you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day, it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whoever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest.
Well, that sounds like Donald Trump.
So most journalists, most of the time, are just doing their job.
Whatever you want to call them.
It's in particular, if it fits a narrative of your department, then you probably should ask for another source, or maybe let's wait a day. But the economic model is you can't wait a day, right? We got to get this out before the other blogger gets it out, or the other network, right? So, and again, you toggle between the three major networks on the news every night, which I do. It seems like there's a script. They all the same stories, like the same order. And I'm pretty sure they don't call each other, go, well, okay, I'm going to cover this one first. Which order are you going to put it? It's just how the system works. And I just, I wish it was different, or, there was just more subtlety or more, I don't know, caution, skepticism.
Michael, can you stick around for one more thing for my locals community?
Oh, yeah,
I want to
sure.
specifically ask you about my favorite conspiracy theory. We'll do that on locals. But the book is Conspiracy.
Is it the one that he believes?
Irrational belief,
Yeah,
irrational.
he's paywalling some more of the conversation, and I mean that's fine. Whatever, we paywall the post game. Although we don't really paywall it. Somebody could be like, "Can I have that MP3?" I'd be like, "Give me $5." No, I'm just kidding. I'd be like, "Yeah, here's a link." So. I think we've watched a little more of Shermer, I think, this year than we generally have. And it seems to me that his view on conspiracism, conspiracy movements is just very outdated. And it doesn't really track with what we see in conspiracism and conspiracy movements as we cover them. They like completely left out, like completely devoid of the community aspect of it. Just the analysis just completely lacks that part. He brought up cults a little bit, but he didn't there. It was just completely devoid of the idea that what happens is you get into a Facebook group with 22,000 people who all believe in chemtrails, right? And you're like, damn, that's a lot of people. And they're all really smart, and they're smart because they agree with me. Well, 22,000 people isn't really that many fucking people. Like, think about how many people are on Facebook, right? Mm-hmm. I would not be unhappy if our viewer count was 22,000 instead of 71 right now, but like it still doesn't mean that most people are watching our show. And I think that people get into those communities, get into those groups, and they get this idea that it's bigger than it is because they see a big number of people in the group, and they gain community there. Madison Star Moon that we've covered at length is a great example of this, because she always talks about all the people in that community as her friends. And some of the most epic meltdowns she ever had was when she thought that some of the people in those communities had slighted her in some way. And at that point, it was no longer about environmental activism, but it was about a community and about gossip and about interpersonal relationships. And that's what these, not just conspiracy communities, but like the IDW kind of gives that to the followers too. They're not telling them that they're in on the big secret. There's like, you're so smart because you're watching this content. And, they probably don't want to get into the analysis of the group dynamics there, because then they might be telling on themselves. Like,
yeah, I was really surprised too when he said that he doesn't think that conspiracy theorists actually believe the conspiracies.
So, and that would have been a good enough time for him to bring up the community aspect, that once you get into these communities, you're going to maybe pretend to believe conspiracy theories that you don't, because that's what your community is doing.
I don't think it's pretend. I think it's, to a certain extent, you might be convincing yourself.
Right.
When you've been exposed to a lot of contradictory evidence, at some point you kind of do have to just convince yourself. But that doesn't mean that you don't believe in the conspiracy. That just means you had some cognitive dissonance and you need to like work through that to get back to your conspiratorial thinking.
Yeah.
Which is what most people do. Very few people break out of it when they have that cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, and maybe I'll end on this. It's unfortunate, I think, that in the last, let's say since maybe 2015, that the people really going after the conspiracy communities have all been leftists, right? The QAnon Anonymous guys are all leftists. Jared Holt is a leftist. Like, we're leftists. And it sort of made it so that it becomes a kind of partisan issue where fucking QAnon being fake is not partisan. It's bullshit. It's just that the people who were motivated to go after it tended to be leftists because it was a far right conspiracy theory about people on the left. And it makes it sort of easier for people to end up in conspiracy communities if they're like, well, the people who are saying this is incorrect are all people on the other side, so why should I listen to them? And somebody like Shermer could have done like just so much better job during these last few years, because he's like a center right kind of guy, like a libertarian kind of guy, right? And so, but they didn't do an QAnon issue of Skeptic until like 2021. And it's like, that should have been like, as soon as that dropped and got popular, it should have been like fertile ground for that magazine. And they may have mentioned it, but they didn't throw it on the cover until it had basically already run its course. And it's just, it's a thing we talk about. It's this, elevator gate, how it put kind of a rift in the skeptic community, left, right, sort of. And I think that that's bad. And I think that a lot of people in the skeptic community, as they became partisan, did a disservice to just debunking more broadly, but to like skeptical communities kind of more specifically. And it just left a hole. And, I don't begrudge any leftist who spent their time debunking conspiracy theories. We call it's like the dystopia beat. Like it just sucks that the more moderate and even like conservative people who called themselves skeptics or tried to brand themselves with critical thinking just kind of fell asleep at the wheel. Like basically after Gamergate, once fucking Pizzagate dropped, those people were all asleep at the wheel, and it just made it seem partisan, and that's fucking bad.
Yeah, I think the media ecosystem on the right, in particular, to a certain extent on the left, but much more so on the right, kind of feeds on those conspiracy theories, though. So I think even if someone were, trying to get out there and debunk them, those kind of media ecosystems don't reward that.
Yeah, but I just think that, like I said, that example of Skeptic magazine not putting a Q on the cover of their fucking magazine until like 2021 is just like the most glaring example. Stunning. It's stunning to me. It was stunning to me. And then, if you remember a very early episode, Brett Weinstein referred to QAnon as an argument. You recall? So it's like,
yep.
And
he tried very hard to not say conspiracy
theory or just batshittery or whatever. So it just sucks. And that's the way that it goes. But shout out to everybody who did the work. It's hard work. It's covering conspiracism is probably bad for your mental health. And it makes it hard for you to talk to regular people at a dinner party because your brain is polluted with fucking whatever's coming out of the back of a jet. And it's just bad news. But everybody, thanks so much for listening again to the Intellectual Dollar Tree. Thanks, Justin, for the raid earlier. That's Tigwork. Thank you for following. If you're listening to the podcast, we have a lively community that hangs out in the chat during, and you might want to check out the show on YouTube. You can kind of see what the chat is talking about during the show. This is Boomers by Periscope. I gots to get a drink and change the color of the light in this room, and we're going to do more things about more insufferable people when we get back.
You recall a
Echoplex Media streams 7 days a week on twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. With a variety of hosts and topics, there's bound to be something you'll like. Or hate so much you can't stop watching it. All times are Pacific. Check out our full schedule at echoplexmedia.com.